Okay, so first, just a quick refresher on like movement in Excel and how to select stuff quickly. So um, let's start with ways to select data. The most broad way to select is if you have a PC, it would be Control A. A is for all. On a Mac, it would be Command A. And this behaves slightly differently depending on whether you're clicked somewhere in the data or if you're clicked somewhere out in one of the blank cells. So like if I'm clicked somewhere out here in the side and I hit Control A or Command A for a Mac, it literally grabs everything as far as the sheet goes in both directions. Whereas if I'm clicked in the data and do that same thing, it knows to stop at the boundaries of the data set. So if you're just trying to grab everything, that's probably the fastest way to do it is with Control A or Command A. Now, to get slightly less broad than that, but still pretty broad, is by clicking on the column titles. Like if I click on C, it grabs all of column C, including the blank cells underneath it. Same thing with rows. Like if I click on row 7, it takes everything all the way to the right, including the blank cells. And you can click and drag to select multiple ones. If you hold shift, it grabs everything between where you're currently selected and where you click. So like if I click on B and hold shift, I can click on H, it grabs everything between. Same thing with rows. And that also even works with specific cells. So if you click on a cell, hold shift and click somewhere else, it grabs everything to that point. Whereas if you hold control or command for a Mac, it only grabs those things. So for example, I could grab B and then only grab F by holding control or command. And then I could like hold shift to grab H and then control again to jump to K and stuff like that. Again, same thing works with rows, same thing works with cells. And then there's another way to select, which is just by holding shift and using the arrow keys. And there's kind of like 3 different combinations of how this works. So if I hold just shift and arrow keys, that moves my selection 1 spot at a time in that direction. So I can add to the selection or I can subtract from the selection by using the arrow keys in whatever direction and holding shift. Now, if you hold just control or just command for a Mac and you hit the arrow keys, it goes all the way to the first blank in that direction. So like control right would take me to the end of the row. Control or command down would take me to the bottom of the column. Same thing to go back up to the top or same thing to go left. And so if you combine that with shift, so like if I'm clicked somewhere and I do both control or command with shift and hit an arrow key, it highlights everything going into that direction, but it stops at the end of the data. So the difference between like selecting a column by clicking on M to grab all of column M, where that grabs all the blanks underneath, is that if I do control or command shift and down arrow, it knows to stop at the end of the data. And most times in Excel, it doesn't matter which one you do. There are some times where one or the other is preferred. For example, if I highlight an entire column and copy it, so like if I said Control C or something, I couldn't paste that in the 3rd row. I can only paste that up in the very top row because it's trying to paste the entire column all the way down in that place. Whereas if I grab the data this way and copy it, well then that one I could paste in the 3rd row because, well, I copied instead of pasted, but it would have let me paste it there because it's just that chunk of data, not all of it. Additionally, some things in the data analysis tool pack, like regressions, for example, those won't work if you select the entire column. It doesn't like it because it's trying to run it with the blanks. Whereas if you select with the controller command, shift and down arrow, it will work. But other things in there, like t-tests and ANOVA, those ones do seem to work by clicking on the entire column. So some of them are like test by test basis, and it's just something you kind of have to get, like you try it and see if it works, and if not, do the other one. But I think that's like kind of the basics of moving around quickly in Excel. Now, something useful for those of you that are using a PC, it unfortunately isn't on a Mac, but what I know is a lot of internships will take away your mouse for like a week or 2 to see if you know how to navigate Excel using just the keyboard, and they would have to be PC based for this to work. But on a PC, if I just hit Alt, you can see these different letters pop up on the menus. And basically you just follow the letters that it says to hit to keep selecting stuff. Now, one thing that's kind of weird is even though I'm currently on the Home tab, if I want to be able to get things on this tab using these Alt commands, I still have to hit H, even though that's currently the tab that's selected. So if I hit H, then you can see all this other stuff gets letters. And so like maybe I wanted to change the color of a cell, so I could hit like FC and it goes into the colors, and then I can choose one, or M to go to more colors. And like, so stuff that you're doing all the time, you just kind of learn what combination of keys come after Alt, and it happens a lot more quickly than trying to click through all the menus. So if you do have a PC, at least sometimes I would try messing with that. Just hit Alt and mess with the key shortcuts instead of clicking on it, just to start familiarizing yourself with it, because it can make it faster, and I know at least some businesses are looking for people to know that. Everyone okay with that stuff? Anything you want to see again there?
But there's nothing of the sort for Mac, right?
No, so on Mac, usually Alt and Option are the same thing, but I've tried hitting Option and it doesn't do it. What you could do is, I know on Macs you can put like a Windows partition where you could download a Windows version of Excel, and then maybe Option would work, or maybe there's some way that you can like download some software that tells Option to behave like Alt in that situation or something. I'm not sure, but just hitting Option, I couldn't find a way to do it just like easily.
Would you have to virtual compute to have it run like a PC?
You can install what's called a second partition on your computer, so it doesn't have to be a virtual machine to do it. It can be like actually installed on the computer.
Okay, cool.
I will say I do have that. That's through Boot Camp, right?
That's a way I've heard of to do it. I'm not a Mac user, so I don't know if that's the only way or not.
Okay. Yeah, I have Boot Camp, so I have a partitioned hard drive with Windows, and it definitely does not work the way it should. It's
okay.
Definitely rough.
Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's a good way or not. But it's not like that big a deal. A lot of it's just knowing that exists in case you're ever put in an internship or something like that where they say, okay, do this without a mouse. Just knowing that you can hit Alt to do that stuff is helpful. But there's certain things that you kind of still need a mouse for. Like, let's say I did want to change the color and I get to this point. Well, I have to be able to click on one of these colors. So I think it's kind of silly that they do that. And also hitting escape goes back a step. So I can go backwards by hitting escape. But I think it's silly that they do that, because really the fastest is a combination of mouse and keyboard. And I think they're just doing it because people only use a mouse and they want you to start using the keyboard, but it's definitely not the most efficient. It's a combination of the two. Anything else on that stuff before we move on? Okay, so let's get at the easiest one out of the way first, which is just how to split this column into two. And with Excel, there's a million ways to do everything. There's other ways to do what I'm going to show you, but using the tool that's built in, which is on the Data tab, and it's this one called Text to Columns, is one of the easiest ways to do this. How many of you, if any, have used that Text to Columns before? I know it's something that gets kind of overlooked a lot. No one used it?
I've used it before.
Used it? Okay. So the way it works is, as long as there's some sort of character separating the words that we want to separate, or the numbers or anything, so like a slash, a period, a comma, a colon, anything like that, then we can do this. For something that's only separated, like no space or anything, it's just like a bunch of different words mashed together, then you'd have to do other types of things, like maybe using equals left or equals right to separate out parts of it. But anything that's separated by something, this will work for. And so I'm actually not sure. I think it might create a new column for me, but I never trust it to. So I always put as many blank columns next to the one that I'm starting with as I need to. So like in this case, I want one blank column for the state name to go into. And so if you don't remember, when you insert a column, it always goes to the left of where you insert it from. So like if I want a column in between B and C, I'm going to cursor over C to do this so that it goes to the left. And then you basically either right click, or if you have a Mac with no mouse, then it's control click on C, and you just say insert, and it puts a blank column in. And then, just if I go too fast or anything, just tell me. Normally in person, I'd be able to see how everyone's doing, but I can't. So just let me know if I need to slow down or anything like that. So now I'm just going to highlight B, and I'm going to go click on text to columns. And this first part, I'm just going to say, yep, I want to do this choice. This delimited basically means there's something separating each of them. So I'm going to say next, and here's where you can choose what's in between these things. So tab is not what I want. I want to tell it it's separated by a comma, but if it's not something on this list, notice other is an option as well. And so you can use that too. And it even gives you a preview down here of what it's going to look like. So location is going to contain just the city, and then there's going to be a column next to it that contains the state. That's what I want. And so then I can say next, which really I could have said finish from the other one because it already looked the way I want. But I just wanted to show that on this page, you can change the formatting of the output columns as well. You can see both of them right now say general. So that's what cells start out as. But if I wanted them specifically to be a text or a date format or something, I could click on these different places where it says general down here to change the format of how those output columns are going to look. But I don't need to mess with any of that right now. So I'm just going to say finish, and then you can see it does what I wanted of putting these back to like two separate columns. People okay with that?
Yep, I tried it without making a
column?
separate column on the right, and it just overrode the
put
other
it over top.
type.
Okay,
Yeah.
so definitely put a new column in. Good
Yep.
to know. Thanks for
Now
trying it.
no problem.
Yeah, I was thinking about trying it, but I was like, oh, I'll have to redo the whole thing if I don't. So I think that one's just good to know that it exists, because I used to try and do like really long commands to get it to separate out the way I wanted, and then I realized this tool was here, so it makes life easier. Have any of you used the way to go backwards from that? So like if I want to put these back into like a cell together with a comma between them, and that's the command called concatenate. Have any of you ever used that one? Alrighty. And so the way this data set actually started was this way. It had the city name and the state name, and I put them together using concatenate to be able to show how to split them. So I'll just show that way as well, of the reverse direction, putting these things together. So I'll go ahead and rename these the right thing, just because I like having labels. So city and state. And then I'll just make a new column. I'll put it right here that says like combined or something, but you can put it wherever you want. This one doesn't have to be exactly to the left or exactly to the right or anything like that. And so just in that first cell there, I'm going to start typing this command. It's called concatenate, so equals and then C-O-N-C. And then it's this second choice in here, which you could finish typing that word, or if you double click on it, then it just gives you that command there. And let me I'm going to actually make this wider so that it's not going over the top so you guys can see what I'm typing. So concatenate. And then what you do here is you can either you're going to tell it as many strings of text as you want to, and it's going to put them all together in that order. And it can be either clicking on cells that you want or typing your own text out in quotes. So if I want the city name and then the state name, but with a comma in between, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first click on city and say, okay, I want the city there, then comma. My second string of text is going to be a comma. So I'm going to put in quotes that I want a comma in there. And then another comma for my third string of text, which is going to be the state name. And then you should be able to close parentheses. Are people okay with that?
Yep.
By default, it'll put a space between them. So you don't need to put a space in there. The first time I did it, I was putting like comma and then space, and then it ended up with 2 spaces. So it'll default put a space. And so if you hit enter, it should end up looking correct. People getting that? Okay. and then we could just cursor over that bottom right corner of that cell and double click to have it copy that formula all the way down. So that's how to split cells and how to put them back together. And again, there's a lot of commands that do that, but most of them are a longer process than using those two things. Any questions on how those work, either the text to columns or the concatenate?
What was the command that you used to fill the whole column?
Oh, so to do that,
yeah.
once you have a command typed in, if you click back on that cell, then this little bottom right corner where you could normally like click and drag to move the formula around, if you just double click there, as long as it's next to other data, it knows to go down as far as that data goes.
Double click, okay. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else on this before I go on? All right, so the next thing is originally these two data sheets were on the same sheet, and I split them so I could show the V-Lookup, index match, X-Lookup, those three things. They're all for the same purpose, basically, of how to get this stuff back over matched up with the correct zip codes. So you can see these zip codes are not in the same order as the zip codes here, assuming it was like two different data sets that we want to combine, and how I could get all of it together. So just to kind of get a familiarity of what you guys know, how many of you have used V-Lookup before and kind of know how that command works?
I've used it, but it's a lot of effort.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've used it like one time in an MIS assignment.
Gotcha. Shane, you've used it a lot, or just once or twice, or
quite a few times?
Quite a few times. Okay. How about index match? It's like two commands put together. Any of you used that before?
I've used that one as well.
Okay.
I've definitely never heard of that.
Okay.
But not frequently.
What's up?
I've used it, but not often.
Okay. And then have any of you heard of the new one, X-Lookup, yet?
I hadn't heard of it.
Alrighty. So what I'm going to do is I'll start with V-Lookup, and then I'll show index match and why I think that one's the better of the two. If you didn't like V-Lookup, index match will probably fix the things you didn't like about V-Lookup. And then I'll show how X-Lookup works. Now, to know if you have it, so last time I checked, it was only released in the like Microsoft 365 version of Excel, which is the one that you can like download from the bookstore and everything. If you just downloaded like the 2016 or whatever the most recent version of Excel is, then it wouldn't be in there yet because they're still like kind of testing it out. But to know if you have it, you could just start typing the command like equals X look, and you would see it pop up if you have it. If not, if you are using Excel 365, you would just need to update it. That's what I had to do, is just download a new version of it. And if you're using a different version of Excel and you really want to use X-Lookup, you could download the 365 version as well. But if not, I think index match is perfectly good to do all the same stuff. They just tried to make X-Lookup a little more user-friendly. And it has some stuff in it for some like very niche situations that would be more helpful than index match. But most of the time, index match is perfectly good. So it's up to you guys, but what I'll do is I'll walk you guys through both the V-Lookup and index match to show the strengths of those, and then I'll just quickly show the X-Lookup because I know that most of you probably won't have that one. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to this housing data sheet, and I'm just going to take these titles and put them over on the other sheet to have placeholders for where everything's going to go. So I'm just going to copy those titles there and say that those same things are going to go right here. So let's start with a V-Lookup, and we'll see why this one is kind of painful and not the most useful. Well, are you guys able to see okay, or should I zoom in on the screen? Like, is it okay to read the commands when I'm typing them and stuff?
Looks good.
Looks good to me.
Okay. So I'm just going to start typing that command. So equals V-Lookup. Again, you could go down and double click on it, or you can just finish typing it and open a parenthesis. And so the first thing it asks for is the lookup value, which is saying, okay, what's the common thing between these two sheets? And in this case, it's the zip code. And what I'm trying to find is the stuff that went with this zip code right here. Since that's the zip code in this row, I want all the other stuff in this row to go with that zip code. So that's what I'm going to look up, is saying, okay, Excel, go find this zip code somewhere. Then I'm going to say comma, and then I have to tell it where to look for this zip code. And for V-Lookup, the where I tell it to look needs to include both the zip codes and whatever output I want. So in this case, it needs to include the zip code and the average rent. So what I'm going to do is go over to my housing data sheet, and I'm going to tell it that I'm just going to grab all of it. Technically, I would only need these first two columns because those have the zip code and average rent, but I'm just going to grab the whole table. It's fine. You could click somewhere in here and even do, no, it didn't like the Control A. I tried that one, but it didn't like it. So what I'm going to do is use the Control Shift right and Control Shift down. So I'm going to click in the first cell, and I'll just say Control or Command Shift and right arrow, and then while still holding those, also hit down arrow to grab all that data. And this is one of the commands where selecting the columns will not work. You can't have those blanks selected underneath. It needs to actually have those bounding boxes around the data in order for it to work. People okay with that? All right, I'll take silence as good. And then before I click back on my other sheet, I'm going to hit comma, and I'll show you why. So if I click back on this other sheet, you can see it keeps that range, but it changes it to be the population data sheet. So I need to still be on the housing data when I hit my comma, so that it kind of locks that in as the sheet that has this A1 through F15,000 range. Then once I've done that, you could click back on the other sheet, but that again causes a little bit of problem that you just need to be aware of. So notice if I click back on my other sheet, it fills in population data here, which I don't want right now because all I'm going to do is type a number in right here. What this column index number is saying, I'm going to go back to housing data, and it's going to fill in housing data again, but just to show what this column index number is asking for is it's saying of that data that we selected, which one has the output we want in it. So we wanted average rent. So it's saying, well, we selected 6 columns here. Average rent was in the second column. So I would type a 2, telling it that that's the column we want it to take the number out of. And then I'm going to say another comma. And then this last part here is counterintuitive. True is approximate match, false is exact match. If anything, it should be the reverse. I don't know why they made it that way, but false is by far the more common one. Usually you want to find exactly that zip code. What true does is it's kind of like Price is Right rules, where it'll round to the closest one without going over. So if it doesn't find the exact zip code, it would just take the closest one without going over, and that could lead to some problems for us here trying to match these up. So there are some times where that's useful, but not most of the time. So usually here you're going to just type the word false. And then you should be able to close parentheses and hit enter, and it should give you the average rent. People okay to there?
I got it up to there.
Okay. Everyone else
Yep,
doing
I'm
all right?
good.
Doing good?
I'm good.
Good. All right. Alrighty, so let me talk about some of the downsides with this. So for one, I'm just gonna reopen this command to look at it. You don't have to if you don't want to. Let's say I wanna actually move this command like to the right or copy it down. So moving it to the right definitely wouldn't work because average home, whatever this is, so average home income, that one is in column 3. So I'd have to update my command to have a 3 here instead of a 2. Because it's in the wrong column. Another thing is if I want to copy this down, so like if I wanted to double click, I'll show you guys and then I'm just going to undo it right away so you don't need to double click this. But if I double click down at the bottom, I'm going to have all these NAs that it couldn't find. And the reason for that is because, so remember this one, the range started at A1 through F15,099. When I'm down here, that whole range has shifted downward. So my range now, you can see, starts at a 15,098. So I would have to lock that range using $signs in order to get it to where I could copy it down. I'd have to put a $sign on this one and on this one to lock it. And then I could copy it down. Now, another problem is what if I add more stuff to my data? So I add in more rows or I add in more columns. Then I would have to go in and update my command in order for it to work correctly. And the last downside with VLOOKUP is that in this range that I select over here, the thing that I'm looking up has to be to the left of whatever we're trying to find. So if zip code had been over on the right side, it wouldn't work until I move zip code over to the left. And so there's a lot of downsides to VLOOKUP, which is why they ended up making a new command of X-Lookup to fix a lot of that stuff. People okay with that and kind of see the shortfalls of this one?
Yep.
Yep.
Alrighty, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get this exact same number, but using the index match choice instead of VLOOKUP. And what I'm gonna do first, and you don't have to do this part with me if you don't want to, but I'm gonna show what just the match part is doing, and then what just the index part is doing, and then show why putting those together is useful. By themselves, they're not that great. But I'm just gonna delete this one because I'm gonna get the exact same number, but I'm gonna do it in a way that I can just copy the formula all the way to the right and double click it down. So I only have to write it once and it'll get all these numbers for me. And it'll be better than VLOOKUP because I could add stuff into the rows or add columns in between and it would still work. So let me first show what match does. So I'm gonna start from the inside and work outward. So if I just say match, what this is gonna do is I'm gonna tell it to look for this zip code. And ideally, I would do it on the other sheet. I'd say find that zip code somewhere in this column of zip codes. I could do it somewhere else, but I'm gonna say find it in this column of zip codes. And so it's saying 15099. So I guess that this zip code is apparently the last one in the data set. Or wherever 1599 is. So what matches do is finding that zip code, what row it's located in. Or no, sorry, I'm doing this incorrectly. I'm sorry. Index does that. My mind. I did index first yesterday. 1 second. This one, yeah, okay. Sorry, match. What match does? Equals match. Sorry. Okay, so see here, it even tells you. It returns the position of an item that matches a specified row. So like, for example, if I said, am I this right? Index takes from the match finds row. Let me try real quick. Yeah. Hold on. So those of you who've used index match, why is my brain not working? What is match for? Oh, I didn't tell it a match type. Sorry. So I want to find this in these want exact. There we go. That's how it works. Sorry, I'm just not filling the whole command. So you can see the third thing it asks for is a match type. Sorry to confuse everyone. Let me start over. So match, what it does, I'm telling it to look for a zip code. I tell it where I want to look for that, which is in these zip codes. And then the last thing it asks for is the type of match, which again is a counterintuitive one. It has positive one is less than, negative is greater than. Again, I don't know why they couldn't just switch those to make them what they seem like they should be. But again, one is exact. Actually, I haven't ever used greater than. I've sometimes than. But I want to type 0 for an exact match. And then what this is the row that zip code is located in within this data. So if I went down to row 497, I would find the zip code of 99685. Okay, people okay with that? Sorry for the start of that. but we're good on just what match does.
What option was it again? Because your screen, like on mine, was kind of like breaking up, so I can't really see.
Oh, sorry. What were you asking for?
Like what option? Like 1, 0, or -1?
Oh, it'd be 0 for the exact match.
Can you please click on the match formula so I can look at the bar and see what I'm missing?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. People are okay with that. It just finds the row that something's located in. Okay. So then let me show you what index does. So I'm just going to get rid of this one real quick because eventually we're going to put these all together, but I want to show kind of what each one's doing. So if I say equals index, then what this one is going to do is it's going to look in a column, go to a specified row, and save what was in that column at that row. So for example, if I told it to look in this column, and if I told it, say, row number 3, and you don't have to fill in the last part of this one, then it should tell me 99577, because that was what was in this selected column in row 3. Are people okay with that? It goes to a column, takes whatever was in the specified row. Good?
Yep.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine those. So basically what I'm going to do is my index command is going to go select the average rent column, but then instead of telling it a specific number for the row, we're going to use match to find the row. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start another one here. It's going to be a combination of those two things. So we're going to say equals index, and I need to tell it I want to go look in the average rent column. So I'm going to say look in this column, and a nice thing here is you can actually click on the column title to select it. So if you add in more rows later, it'll still be good to go. And then I'm going to say comma, because again, I don't want to click anywhere else until I've put a comma in to kind of lock that first part of my command. And then rather than typing a row, so like I could, for example, type 2, and it would tell me that first average rent, but I don't want to have to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type match, so a second command here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tell it to match the zip code we're looking for. So I need to go back to my population data sheet. So I'm going to match this zip code here. And then where I want to look for that is in all the other zip codes. So I'm going to look for that zip code in these ones. And then I wanted an exact match, so 0. And then since we opened 2 sets of parentheses, we should close 2 of them. And I'm going to hit enter, and then I'll double click on the formula so you guys can see it kind of zoomed in case you're still trying to get some of that typed or selected. Let me scroll to the right. So it should look like this so far. Are people okay with that?
Yeah.
Hold on, can you give me like 10 more seconds?
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
All right, we're back at it.
Okay, I got it.
Alrighty. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how we can use $ to lock parts of this command to let me be able to copy this command all the way to the right and copy it down. So if you aren't familiar with what $ do, is you can put them in front of references. So like, for example, this F2 right here. Let's say I put a $ in front of the F. You don't need to type this, I'm just showing an example. But if I put a $ in front of the F, what that's saying is when we're using that reference, never leave column F. But if we copy the formula down, you can move down in the rows as we get the formula further down, just never move it left or right. I could also put a $ in front of 2, telling it, okay, command, you can change which column we're looking in. You can look in column G and H and I as we copy this formula to the right, but never change from row 2 if we move the formula down. And you could lock both, which you could type $ manually, or there's a shortcut for it. There's like those function keys across the top of your keyboard, and depending on your computer, so on some PCs, it's just the F4 key, so the function 4 key. Some PCs, you have to hit the little FN button on your keyboard. It's either in the bottom left or bottom right of your keyboard. It's like the function button and then F4. And on all Macs that I've seen, you have to hit the function button and then F4. So like if I just hit F4, it puts in $cents for me. But it's a little different on each keyboard. Sometimes it's not that bad to type in $, but it's a little bit faster to use those. And some Macs, you don't see the function keys until you hit function, and they highlight on like that little screen at the top of your keyboard. So if I want this to move to the right, let's talk about how we would do that. So this first column here, the one that was on housing data, BB, that was the average rent column. Well, as I copy my formula to the right, I do want that one to keep changing, because once I drag this formula one spot to the right, I'm now in average home income. And so I want column B to also shift one to the right to be looking in column C. So the first part of my formula here, I don't need any $signs right here. This F2, that was where I referenced this zip code. For that one, as I drag my formula to the right, I don't want it to look in the area code and then the land area and then the water area. I don't want it to keep changing columns. I only want it to move down in the zip code column as I copy the command down, which means I'm going to put a $sign just in front of the F, telling it don't ever leave column F, always stay in the zip codes, but you can move down as we copy the formula down so that you're looking at different zip codes. People okay with that part? Understand what that $sign's doing?
Yep.
Okay. And then that last one, this column AA, that was where we looked in the zip codes on our housing data sheet. And we want to always stay in the zip code column there to try and find zip codes. Otherwise, as we copy our formula to the right, it's then going to look in the average rent and average home income and so on. So I'm going to put $signs in front of both of these letter A's, telling it always stay in column A. Don't ever leave that one so that it's always looking in those other zip codes. And once you have all the types, so just those 3 different $signs added in, you should be able to hit enter, and it'll still give us the same number here. But now if you click back on that cell, so if I cursor over that bottom right corner, technically you could double click and it would copy it down, but it's faster if you move it to the right first, copy it across the different columns, and then double click. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag to copy that formula moving across, and then I'm going to double click and it'll, if I did it correctly, while those are all highlighted, if I double click, it will copy those all downward. My mouse is just kind of getting stuck. So then it fills it all in. People okay there?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So then I'm just going to really quickly show what X-Lookup does. Again, index match is the one I've used a lot. I like it a lot more than V-Lookup because it doesn't care where the columns are. They can be to the left or to the right of each other. You can click on the actual column titles. So if you add in rows, that's fine. Also, you're only selecting one column at a time. So if you add columns in between, it'll update the reference and still work. It's just better all around. You can use $signs to move it to the right and copy it down. Like pretty much everything about index match is better. I think that people just kind of stay away from it because they think, oh, 2 commands must be harder. But really, VLOOKUP is a pain in itself. So I don't know why people don't like it, but a lot of employers I've heard mention VLOOKUP, but they don't talk about index match. But if you know index match, just say, yeah, I know VLOOKUP, and just use index match instead. So how X-Lookup works, I'm just going to show a quick example of what it's asking for here. So if I typed equals X-Lookup, so it's meant to be structured a lot like the VLOOKUP, but where I can select just entire columns the way that index match works. So lookup value, still the same thing. I would look for my zip code, for example. So I'd click on the zip code here. I can't get over to my thing now. Let me figure out a better way to do this. Tell you what, we're just gonna match something on here so that I can still show my whole command. So equals X-Lookup. This matching isn't going to make sense why we would do it, but we're just going to do it. So let's say I wanted to find, for some reason, this female population, and I wanted to look in this whole column. I can choose the whole column, which is nice. And then I want it to tell me what the average rent was. So it works just like index match, where you're selecting the columns, and the nice thing here is it labels them for you of which one is the lookup and which one is the return, whereas index match, you just kind of have to know which one to put where. And then notice another nice thing in this command is there's all these other choices. So like if not found, so if it doesn't find it, what do you want it to return? So you could have it return like missing or error or something like that. So it kind of has like an if error command built into it. And I don't know what, or I guess match mode is like, so let's keep typing. So I'll say error. And then match mode is still the same sort of thing here. I don't know what wildcard character match is because this command's new and I haven't used it. But you can see these are, they actually say what each one is. Like what does -1 mean instead of just saying like a less than, greater than, it kind of explains it more. But I can still type exact match. And then the last thing it asks for isn't showing because I still didn't go far enough over. So let me close this and move over a little bit so we can see. So the last thing it asks for is search mode. And again, I haven't messed with this, so I don't know exactly how these work, but it kind of tells you here, do you want to start at the bottom and go up or start at the top and go down? And that would matter if you're doing like not exact match. If you're doing like next larger or next smaller, then the search mode of whether you start at the bottom or the top could matter. But all that is like fancier than what you would usually need. Usually all you would need to have are these 3 inputs. It's just nice that those are built in there so you don't have to use other commands in case you're doing something special that requires that sort of stuff. So this one is meant to be very straightforward. It's only 3 inputs. They're in a logical order. They say what they do. And you can select it the same way index match works. People okay there? Understand what this one's doing? Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Just wanted to make sure. I know yesterday my internet was a little unstable, so.
So that essentially does the same thing as index match?
It does, yeah. Basically, they're just trying to make it a more streamlined version because with index match, like when I'm typing a command of that, so I have to just know that the first cell or the first column I click on is what I want as my outputs. Like I had to know, okay, click on average rent first, and then in the match is where I'm going to put zip code. It doesn't say that here. Whereas notice in X-Lookup, it's telling you what each thing is. It says like this one's the lookup value, this one's the lookup column, this one's the return column. So it's just like labeled more clearly so that you don't forget how to use it and stuff. But other than that, it works the exact same way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. People good with all that? Okay, so Shane, sorry, I know you did this macro before at one of the workshops last semester, but others of you, have you ever used macros in Excel before?
I don't think so.
I definitely have not.
Okay. So let me first explain what a macro is. So what it's going to do is we can tell Excel to start recording everything we do. It's going to record like in a code format that you can even edit if you want to. It records where all you click, how often you scroll, it records any commands that you do, anything you delete, anything you add. It just records everything you're doing until you tell it to stop recording. And it saves all of those steps to whatever keybind you tell it to save as. And so where that's useful is we had a former student that worked at Altria for one summer doing an internship, and every day he got the same sort of data set just for yesterday's sales. It's like an updated version of the same thing. And so every day he's doing the exact same things to that data set to get it ready to use. And so if you're going to do the same thing a bunch of times, then it's probably worth taking the time to make a macro to do those steps. So you just hit like Control-Shift-R or something, and it does it instead of you having to do all those steps. Now, if you're only going to do something once or twice or a couple times, it's probably not worth it because macros can be a little finicky. They're hard to get to do exactly what you want, especially if it's something complicated. Because like if it's a different column another time, like maybe one day it's in column B that you want to do something to, and a different day it's in column J, then the macro won't work. So they can be a little bit hard to get to do what you want. So it's usually only worth it if you're going to be doing something a bunch of times. But it is cool to know that they exist and kind of how to make them. And so what I'm going to show you guys how to do is one that isn't that useful, I guess. Basically, some of these columns have this like NaN in them, like where the data was missing. So we're going to write a macro to remove the NaNs from 2 columns at a time. And I just chose 2 so I can show like an extra command while we're doing this. If I was actually trying to make something like this for a job, I'd probably try and figure out how to make it work for like all the columns on the sheet or something. But I just want to do 2 because it's already hard enough to get it to work that way. So the one we make might not even work that well. It'll maybe remove some of them, but maybe not all of them depending on where they are. But I'm just going to at least show you guys the idea behind a macro, how to make them, and how to go about editing it at least a little bit just to get a basis of them. Is that okay with you guys?
That sounds good.
Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new sheet, and I'm going to take 2 of these columns that had NaNs in them. So like, for example, columns N and O, and I'm just going to move those to a new sheet to get set up with how I could do this macro. So I'm just going to grab N and O and copy both of those, and I'm going to put those on a new sheet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show first where the macro is located, how to start making one, and then I'm going to talk through the steps that we're going to do. It's a good idea to have a plan for what you're about to do, because otherwise, if you like mess up or something, all that gets recorded. And it's not a big deal because as long as you get to the end point, it'll still work every time you use it. It'll just like, it'll do your mistake and then correct it every time that you hit the button. It'll recreate all those steps, and so you'll end up with like a longer macro than you needed, and it's not as efficient and it might mess up in certain situations. So it's a good idea to have a plan so that you don't have to like backtrack or undo a step or something like that. So where they're located is on the View tab in Excel. So it's close to the end. There's this View tab here, and on PCs, there's this drop down that says Macros, and I have 3 buttons in there. On a Mac, you just see these 3 buttons located right here. So you see a button that's for View Macros, Record, and then one for this Use Relative Reference. I don't know if it has that one, but it should at least have the View and Record macro buttons. Are you guys seeing where those are?
Yep.
Okay, so before we record this macro, I'm just going to walk through the steps of what we're going to do real quick. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make in column C, I'm going to make an if command that's going to look at if either the cell from column A or the cell from column B contains NaN. If either of those contain NaN, it'll return a 1, and otherwise it'll return a 0. And so we get a little bit of refresher on if commands here as well. Then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to filter those so that I can filter out to see only the ones. So basically all the ones that had an error in either of those columns. And then I'm going to highlight those using the like Command or Control Shift left and down arrow. And then I'm going to delete the rows that went with those. Once I've deleted all those rows, I'm just going to delete everything that I'd created. So I'm going to like unfilter the data to back how it was before. And I'm going to delete my column C that we're going to create just to get everything back to how it looks right now, but without the NaNs in it. So that's the steps we're going to do. And then we're just going to tell it to record those things. People okay there?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to macros. And again, if you're on a PC, you have to click the drop down. If you're on a Mac, you just click the record macro button. So we're going to click record macro. And we have to name it something. You can't have spaces in the name, but you can do like underscore and stuff. So I'll call this like remove NaN or something like that, just to know what this thing is. If you're going to have a bunch of these at some point, the more specific the name, the better. For the shortcut key, you can either just type a letter. So I'm going to use the letter N because NaN makes me think of that. I want something I can remember. But Control N would make a new document. So I'm going to use Control Shift N. So notice if I hold Shift when I hit N, it adds Shift to my keyboard shortcut. I could also just type N, but then that's like overlapping with make a new document. So I'm going to do Control Shift N. And then where you store it to, for now, just put it in this workbook so that you don't have this macro like all over the place. But if you were doing this like at a job or something, you'd want to save it to your personal macro workbook so that you can use it across different Excel sheets. And then it needs some sort of description. Again, if this was a macro that you were going to use, you'd want a description of what it does so that you know when you look back at your list what each one is for. But I'm just going to say something like removes NaN from cells. Just something easy so I don't have to type too much. People good there, ready to hit OK and start recording? Okay, so I'm going to say OK, and then now we're recording. And mine at least used to have a little box in the bottom right or bottom left corner that showed me that I was recording, but it doesn't have that for me now. But I can see that if I go back to here, stop recording is a choice, so that's how I know that I'm recording. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say like is NaN or something. I'm just titling this column because I like titles, and when I filter, it's good to know like what column is which. And here's where we're going to type our if command. So I'm going to say equals if and open a parenthesis. And if you haven't seen if commands in a while, I'll kind of walk through what this is doing. So the first part is a logical test where we're just telling Excel something we want it to check for. It can be as simple as, is this cell more than 3 or something? In this case, since I'm looking for did either of these cells contain NaN, that means I need a second command in here to be my test, which is going to be the command of OR. So OR, if either of the criteria I specify are true, it's going to say true, and otherwise it's going to say false. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type OR, not of, OR. And then you can put as many things as you want in here, and it'll look for are any of those things true. So what I'm going to ask it first to look at is, was this first cell here equal to, quotes, NaN? And I need quotes because it's text. If I was looking for it to be equal to a specific number, then you wouldn't use quotes. Then I'm going to say comma, and then the next thing I want it to check, the other part of the OR, is was the second cell equal to NaN? And that's all I need here because I only have 2 cells, but again, you could keep listing as many things as you want in that OR command. So then I can close parentheses there, and that's the first part of the if. That's my logical test, was were either of those things true? Then I say comma. Now the if command after that comma wants, what do we give back if that was true, if either of those were NaN? And I'm just going to do simple 1, and then another comma, if not 0. You could change those to be other stuff. Let's say I wanted it to be like true, false. I could say quotes true if that was true. And I could say quotes false if it was false. I'm just going to do 1s and 0s because I think it's fast, but you can always change that to be whatever outputs you want. And then I need to close another parenthesis. And I can hit enter, and that one should be a 0 because neither of those were NaN. You guys okay there?
Yep.
Okay. Then I'm just going to copy that formula all the way down again. So I'm going to click back on it, double click the bottom right corner. And then I like to just scroll down whenever I do an if command and make sure it's actually working. So I'm going to go find where an NaN was, and I can see, okay, those are giving me 1s. That's a good thing because that means it's actually working. So then I'm just going to go back to the top. And that scrolling and going back to the top is in my macro. I'll show you guys how you can take it out if you want to, but you definitely don't have to. Good to hear. Everyone's macro or everyone's if command is working. Got some 1s in there.
Yep.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a filter to this data, which you can highlight the columns. Also, if you're just clicked anywhere in the data here, and we click filter, it'll put a filter on all the columns in our data. So I'm just clicked somewhere in the data. I'm going to go to the data tab, and I'm going to click this little filter button right here. And it puts these little drop downs here. And so what I want to do is I want to go to the drop down for that is NaN, and I want to tell it to only show me the ones. So basically only show me the ones that had NaN somewhere in them. So I'm going to uncheck the 0 and say, okay. And then now I'm seeing only the ones. People still good? Sorry, I have to keep asking, but I just can't tell.
Actually, what were you just clicking? The filter?
Yeah, okay. So did you get these drop downs, or do you need to see how to get that part?
That's the part I'm missing.
Okay, so as long as you're clicked somewhere in the data, then just go up to your data tab up at the top, and there's this filter button here kind of in the middle of that tab. And so you just click that button, and it puts those drop down arrows there.
Got it, thank you.
Yep. And then I went to the is NaN drop down, and down here it's showing me the choices in that column are 0 or 1. I'm just going to unselect the 0 so that I only see the ones, and I'm going to say okay. Now, what I want you guys to notice is that when you filtered, it's showing you over here only the rows where the ones were, basically. So notice we're starting in row 97, since that's where the first ones were. Then it jumps to 98, and then 677. And I want you to remember that C97 as something important. Now, when I tried to do this yesterday, it still didn't work, but I just want to at least illustrate a point here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to click in this first cell right here, and I'm going to select everything to the left and everything down. But what I want to point out is right now I'm technically starting in row 97. Is what I'm selecting. I'm selecting C97. What if another column I grabbed had its first NaN in row 60? Well, starting in row 97 would be too far down, and it wouldn't catch that one that was in row 60. So once we have this macro created, I'm going to go back into the code and tell it, rather than starting in C97, to start higher up, like C2, so that hopefully it gets ones that are located higher up in there. So that's why I'm saying just remember that C97 so we can find it in the code later. But once I've clicked on that cell, so I just clicked right here, then all I'm going to do is either Control or Command, depending on a Mac or PC. So Control or Command, Shift, and left arrow to go left, and then down arrow to go all the way to the bottom. We're just selecting all the data starting from that cell on the top right. And then I want to actually delete these. So rather than don't just hit the delete key or anything, because that just clears them, we want to actually get rid of those rows. And so the way I'm going to do that is if you have a PC, you right click. On a Mac, it would be Control click somewhere on that selected data and say delete row. And it's going to ask, do you want to delete that entire row? And I'm going to say yes. And so it got rid of those. People good there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so now that those are deleted, I'm just gonna get everything looking back how it looked before. So I'm gonna go to my filter here. So this little filter thing, it's not quite a drop-down arrow anymore. It has a little filter icon on it. And I'm just gonna say clear filter, which takes me back to how it looked before. And then I'm gonna unfilter my data. So I'm gonna uncheck that filter on my data tab. So you can see it's highlighted. Oh, well, I'm down at the bottom here, but you can see it's highlighted. I just click it again to unfilter them. And then I'm going to delete this column C to get back to where I originally was. And then once you've done all that, then we're just going to say stop recording. So I'm going to go back to my view tab, and then I'm going to click the stop recording button. Good?
Yep.
Okay. So first, that's how a macro recording works. You just start doing stuff and you record it and it saves all that. And lots of times it takes a couple tries because you'll make it work for some of the data, but then you try a different set of data and it doesn't quite work the way you wanted, and so you have to figure out how to fix that. And so that's why I was saying, if you're only going to do something a couple times, it's probably not worth going through the process of making the macro, because again, you have to troubleshoot them a lot usually in order to get them to work how you want. But if you're doing something every day for 3 years, it's probably worth taking a couple hours to get a macro to work. So let me show you guys how we can edit these macros in the coding part. And just know, so the code is written in is called VBA. Some of you might know VBA. I don't know VBA, but can at least pick out parts of what it's doing, and I'll show you guys what I mean by that. So to see the code that it's using, we go back to our macros, and rather than saying record macro, we're just going to click on view macros, and you should see that one on the list now. And then I'm just going to say edit, and it's going to open this new screen here with this code in it. Are you guys able to see that on yours?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so if you haven't ever done any sort of coding before, this can look kind of intimidating, but if you start to look at what it's saying, you can see what some of these things mean. So for example, every time it says something like this, range and then something select, that's just when I clicked on a cell. So this row here just means I clicked on C1. This one means I clicked on C2. This one is where I scrolled down to row 84. That's all that that's saying. So like I was saying that after I did my if command here, I scrolled down to make sure it was working. That's this stuff where I clicked to go all the way down. Here's where I double clicked to have it fill that formula all the way down. So you can kind of pick out what a lot of the stuff is doing. And remember that C97 was where we wanted to grab everything from the left and down. So that was this right here where we clicked on cell C97. And mine has where I had to go all the way back up to the screen. But like all this here is where I was explaining why we were doing C97. This is the one where I actually did my left and down. So that's the one you want to look for. This X1 to left, X1 down is where we did like the controller command shift and left and then down arrow. And so the selection right before that is the one that I want to be C2 instead. So that hopefully it would work that if there was an NAN higher up than row 97, it would still select it. And I tried giving it one that was higher up yesterday and it didn't work, and I didn't want to take the time during the workshop to figure out why. I've gotten it to work before and I don't remember what I did, but I just want to show like kind of how we can edit these things and where some of the troubleshooting can occur, that we wouldn't want to start in row 97, we'd want to start higher than that. And there's no save in here. Once you've made that edit, you just close out of it and it saves it automatically. People okay with that? Kind of understand how macros work and what to do with them?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So we have like 20-ish minutes left. I don't know what you guys think would be best to see in that time. I can again show conditional formatting and how it goes with filtering. We could do some pivot table stuff. We could try and get through both in 20 minutes. I think I could do that. At least basics of each, or something else. Any thoughts on what we do?
We seem to run into pivot tables a lot if
Okay.
nobody else has any.
Let's do pivot tables.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll make a fairly basic pivot table, and I'll show kind of how you could start adding more complication to it. And then from that pivot table, I'll show a little bit of the conditional formatting with filter. So what I'm going to do here is I'll show how we can use those three tools, pivot table, conditional formatting, and filter, to, let's say we wanted to find in Arizona which zip codes are associated with the top 20% of average rent. So the top 20% highest rent zip codes in Arizona. There's a lot of ways I could probably answer that question, and a lot of them might take a little bit of time. With those three tools of pivot table, conditional formatting, and filter, if you know kind of how to do that, I could answer that question in like a minute. I could even find you the ones that were the top 20% and the top 10% and have those highlighted different colors and sorted and everything. So first thing to know about making a pivot table is when we're going to do that. So I'm just going to show here where it's located is on the Insert tab, Pivot Table all the way on the left side. If I just select the data as it is right now, that pivot table will work. But if I add any data in, so like I get more data and that makes more rows in my data set, or if I add more columns, I would have to go update the data that was selected in the pivot table and get a new one. If before you make the pivot table, you turn all of this data into a normal table, then it references the table instead of the data range, and you can add in columns and rows, and it'll automatically update it into your pivot table. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to grab all my data here. So again, easiest way is if I'm clicked somewhere in the data, hit Control-A or Command-A, it grabs everything. And I'm first just going to go to Table right here. So it's on the Insert tab, and for me it's the third thing from the left. It's just called Table. And when I click that, it's saying, do you want to use all this data that's selected? And I say yes. And so I say okay, and it just makes it into a table. It's right now named Table 1. You could rename that if you wanted to. That's just the default name, and it's the one I'm going to stick with since we don't need to mess with it, but you could if you wanted to.
I'm sorry, how do you select all the data again?
Yep, so
and I'm on a Mac.
It'd be Command-A.
Got it.
All right, and then it was just Insert and then Table. And it should already have the range selected. You can just say okay.
Got it, thank you.
Yep. So now what I'm going to do is, I think you still want everything selected, so I'm going to keep everything selected. I could probably do it without doing that, but I'm just going to keep everything selected because it'll automatically fill in the reference that I want. So I'm going to go back to Insert, but this time we're going to go to Pivot Table. And you can see right here, instead of the normal range that it gives of like A1 through F2000 or something, it just says Table 1, which is the name of this table, meaning that if I add to the table, it'll know to update it automatically in my pivot table. And so then I can say okay, and it takes me to this new sheet where we do all our pivot table stuff. And everyone kind of has their personal preferences on how they make pivot tables. There's a lot of ways to do it. What I like is to click and drag these different things from this list into the different boxes that I want them in, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so I'm going to start simple. I just know I want to see all the zip codes listed, and I want to see the average rent that goes with each of those zip codes. And so first thing is whatever we're listing them by, so in this case zip code is what we're separating them by, that's going to be my rows. It's basically saying each row is a different zip code. So I'm going to take zip code, click and drag that and drop it down in rows. And so you can see it makes a row for each zip code. And later we're going to tell it to see only the Arizona ones. And then what I want to see from each zip code is the average rent. So I'm going to find average rent on my list, and I'm going to drag that to values. Now on some computers I've seen that like these windows are like super small or something like this, and it's hard to find what you're looking for. You should be able to like cursor in here and get this little arrow that lets you resize the stuff in here. At least somewhat, to make it easier to see. So if you're having trouble seeing certain things, know that you can at least somewhat resize them. But I'm going to take average rent and drag it to values. I'm just going to first just show me this one. And this is the only data set I've ever seen that default shows the count here. Normally it shows the sum as the default one. I don't know why this one's showing count by default, but we can change that. So again, down here in this values box where now it says count of average rent, on a PC, there's this little drop-down arrow. On a Mac, there's a lowercase I. And so if you have a Mac, just click that lowercase I. On a PC, it's one extra step. We click the drop-down and go to Value Field Settings. And that takes you to a window kind of like this one. And I'm just going to say average. There should only be one average rent for each zip code. So averaging those things is fine. It's just going to average the one thing and return that value. Really, some average min max should all return the same thing, I would hope. But in case there's multiple measurements from a specific zip code, I'm going to do average so that it just takes the average of them. And I'm going to say okay. So then we should see the different average rents show up. People okay to this point?
Yep.
Okay, so something I want to show that is pretty easy to do, but I didn't know about it for a long time, and I think a lot of people don't know, is once you've done this, if you double click any of the numbers in that average rent column, it's going to make a new sheet and show you all of the rents and everything else in the row associated with that rent that went into calculating that average. In this case, they're each only going to show one row because there's only one average rent per zip code. But let's say 10 things went into calculating that average, it would show all 10 of those on a new sheet. What I mean by that is if I double click one of these things, you can see it makes a new sheet here where it's showing me these are all the different things associated with that zip code and that average rent. These are the ones that went into that average. And you'd see more things in this list if there were more averages or more average rents that went into calculating that average. It just makes it on a new sheet there. So it can be easy to isolate specific things by first filtering it very specifically on your pivot table and then just double clicking it. But let's talk about how we can get this to just show Arizona. So again, there's a couple ways here. There's a filters choice. And so one option is I could take state and I could put that in filters. And then up here in the top, it gives me a drop down where I can choose, do I want to see all the states or do I want to see specifically Arizona? So I could click on Arizona and say, okay. If you wanted to be able to select multiple states at a time, notice there's this little box here that allows me to click like maybe I want Arizona and Colorado or something. And then I could say, okay. Some people like the filter one. I personally like slicers more, so I'm going to use slicers instead. So I'm going to change it back to all of them. And then I'm going to get rid of the filters because I don't like it as much, but if you like it, that's fine, use that one. What I like are slicers, and the way you can see slicers are you have to be first clicked somewhere in your pivot table, and then in the tabs across the top, you should see a special tab here. Oh, no problem, Shiraz, see you later. You should see a special tab here that's something like this name. I think in some versions of Excel it's slightly different. Mine's called Pivot Table Analyze. Yours might just say Analyze or something like that. But on that tab, you should see this button called Insert Slicer. And so when I click that, I can choose multiple categories to have slicers of at once. And I could do the same thing by dragging multiple categories to filters, but it's harder to keep track of what categories you've filtered across than it is with slicers. And I'll show you guys what I mean by that. So I'm going to choose both state and let's say type. So I'm going to choose two things. We're not going to use the type one. I just want to kind of show the slicers. So state and type. And notice it gives me these two things. So these are the different types of locations that are in the data set. And here's the different states. And the nice thing here is you can click on like Alabama, and notice there's only towns apparently in Alabama. There's no cities or village or urban or anything because that's the only one available now. But if there were multiple ones in any of these states, I think they're all kind of different. But if there were multiple ones, then I could select multiple things at a time. So like I could click on New Jersey and I could select city and town or something. The selections in here work a lot like other stuff in Excel. You can click and drag to select multiple things. You can also hold Shift to grab everything in between. You can click on one, hold Control or Command to select specifically. And notice then I could look at only towns and stuff like that. There's a lot of choices there. So what I'm going to do is change the type back to all, and then I'm going to select only Arizona. So basically I'm seeing only the Arizona zip codes here. Everyone okay there? How that's working?
Yep.
One thing I do want to point out is let's say that I was like, I filtered here on a slicer to be like only Arizona through California or something. And then if I delete this slicer, it stays filtered that way. I'd have to go back and unfilter it. So make sure if you're ever gonna get rid of one of your slicers that you select everything again before you delete it so that you're back to the unfiltered version. But in this case, we want Arizona. And you can also go ahead and delete the type slicer if you want to, because we're not going to use it. I just wanted to show how multiple ones work together. Just make sure that everything's highlighted before you delete it. So our goal was to get the top 10% or top 20% of the average rents. Now, just know in these pivot tables, there are a lot of other things that you can do in here. And a lot of it's just playing around with it. So if you aren't sure if you can do something, try right-clicking or control-clicking on something. Or try clicking on the analyze and messing with like these options up here and different sort of things. Like for example, one thing you can do that a former student used is they were looking at sales across a bunch of different salespeople at a company. And so I showed them how they could like split it by state, like they could filter sales by state and then have it break out a separate pivot table for each of the sales reps. So you can do a lot of stuff with these. And a lot of it's just mess around with it or Google it, because if you're trying to do something, chances are someone else has, and you can pretty easily find how to do that stuff. So this is kind of how to make a basic pivot table, and there's more stuff that you can do. A lot of it's just trial and error. But let's go ahead and talk about how we'd answer that question. So next, I'm going to do some conditional formatting and filtering. And I could do all of that right here, but I don't like to mess up the data that I have. I like to preserve what I've got here. So I'm going to move this stuff to a new sheet. So basically, I'm going to take from here all the way down. So I'm just going to do Control or Command Shift down to highlight all of that. But then I don't want this grand total row. So I can modify my selection by holding just Shift and hitting up arrow once. And then I'm just going to copy all this and I'm going to move it to a new sheet to work with it in its own space. And I'm also going to leave a row to put titles in. So I'm just going to paste this right here in the second row. And then I'm just going to title what these were. So zip code and rent. Everyone still good with me here?
Yep.
Okay. So this conditional formatting here, it's located on the Home tab. And I feel like it often gets overlooked because usually the Home tab is the boring tab. It's just for like highlighting stuff. But conditional formatting is actually really powerful. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to highlight the rent columns. I'm just clicking on B. And I'm going to go into this conditional formatting. So it's on the Home tab right here in the middle. And I'm going to do this top bottom rules. And notice there's this one that's called top 10%. It doesn't have to be 10. You can change that number. So this is top of any percent. I want to do 20. So I'm going to click the one that says top 10%. And I'm going to change this to say, no, I want the top 20%. And it's going to highlight those right now as red. To me, top shouldn't be red. What I'm going to show is how we can do the top 20% one color and then the top 10% a different color. So I'll make this one like yellow and then we'll make the top 10% green or something. But if you don't like that, do a different one. You can choose any of these choices. You can even do a custom one. But I'm going to do the yellow for top 20 and then I'll make the top 10 green. And so I can say okay. Now let's say all I wanted was just the top 20%. I've got them highlighted now. What I could do next is put a filter on these. So I can click somewhere in my data, go to the data tab, go to filter, and then if I click on the drop down arrow for rent, notice one of these things is filter by color and there's sort by color. And the reason there's two choices in those, there's one that's a light yellow and one that's a dark yellow, is because those cells both have a light yellow fill and a dark yellow text. So either of these two choices are going to result in the same cells being shown. So I'm just going to click the light yellow fill, and then here, these are all my zip codes that are the top 20% of rents. And so I found it pretty easily. Notice if we weren't like stopping along the way, we could have pretty quickly made the pivot table, brought it over here, done the conditional formatting, and filtered it. And there's our top 20% really quickly. Let's say I want to see the top 20% and the top 10%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the filter that I have right now. So I'm going to just go back to that drop down and say to clear that filter. I'm again going to highlight rent, and I'm going to go back to conditional formatting, and we're instead going to do a top 10%. So still the same place, still top 10%, but I'm going to keep it as 10. And I'm going to say to fill these ones with green. Maybe high rent is bad. Maybe it should have been red. I don't know. So I'm going to say okay. And here, what I want to show is the difference between filtering and sorting. So on that filter dropdown that we created, we have both. We have sorting and there's filtering. Filtering only shows the things that you've chosen. And notice there's a lot of choices in here. There's not only the filter by color stuff, but there's also all these number filters that you can choose to look for top of certain things. I could maybe even have filtered top 10% here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by color. And I want to sort it to see the green ones at the very top and the yellow ones after that. So that's going to be a custom sort. So I'm going to go to sort by color, custom sort. And for my first one, I'm telling it, okay, look in the rent column. I want to sort on the cell color. And this looks a little bit different on Mac versus PC. On Mac, these drop downs aren't as obvious. You have to like, they're like little arrows, and you have to kind of click just anywhere underneath where it says column and anywhere right underneath where it says sort and stuff to get those drop downs. But they work the same way. And then I want to see the green ones on top. And then what I'm going to do is add a level. So for me, it's this add level button right here. On a Mac, there's a little plus down in the bottom left of that menu. And that makes a second level here. This one should still be in the red column, still looking at color. And this one is going to be the yellows next. And so then if I say OK, I can see, OK, here's my top 10%. Then these are like 10 through 20%. And then these are everyone else. And I've got them all colored right there and easy to see. People able to follow that one okay? Good with that?
Yep, I got it.
And so I guess there's only 2 of you left. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see how conditional formatting is pretty nice, and especially compared with combined with filter, you can get like things that seem complicated to find pretty easily. And definitely don't be afraid to just look around in this conditional formatting. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. One that is kind of interesting is like the date occurring. Someone asked at one of the workshops, like they said they were at an internship last summer and their boss wanted them to like highlight all the appointments coming up in the next week, and they did it like manually or something. You could have just done a date occurring and say this week or something, and it highlights all of them yellow. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do in here. A lot of different rules and coloring and everything like that. And then when you combine that with filter, you can isolate the specific things you're looking for. Questions on any of that?
Yeah, that's actually really cool.
All right. Anything else you guys want me to talk about before we call it?
I did have an issue with the index match.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to have waited so long.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I'd wait since everybody else was working on stuff. But when I did it, so I kept the first average rent column with the V-Lookup so that I could reference it. And then when I did the second set of columns that had average rent, home income, and etc., I got the same value for each column.
That sounds to me like maybe you put $1 in front of both the F and the 2.
Let me retype in my formula because I deleted it while we were working. I took a picture of it, so I just need 1 sec to type
Gotcha.
it in. If that's
Cool.
what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that you probably have like 1 too many $signs somewhere or something.
Okay.
Did you have anything else you wanted to see, Kelsey, or any other questions? Or?
No, I think I'm good. I got a lot out of this.
Cool. There'll be a recording also. I'm not sure where they're going to be uploaded, but somewhere. And so if you ever need to like see a refresher, we'll have recordings of these. And then also at some point, we're going to build like a D2L toolkit that all other students have access to with like kind of different videos on different things. So basically there'll be like a beginner Excel that's like kind of if you've never opened it, and then there will be specific videos for specific topics. There'd be like one on like beginner pivot tables and intermediate pivot tables, and one on like V-Lookup and index match and stuff like that. So that hopefully at internships and stuff, if you're like, oh, I really wish I remembered how to do this, you can just watch that video real quick and see it.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, pretty much every job, almost no matter what industry you want to work in, they need you to be very proficient in Excel.
Yep. That is true. But no one believes me when I tell them that in the labs their sophomore year.
Yeah, I want to go into finance, so I already know that I need to be an Excel expert, but yeah, I think it's really required everywhere now.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, I'm going to jump off then.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, that worked for me. I think I had $2.
$2 signs?
I think that was what the problem was. And then,
Okay.
so we created the macro, but we didn't run it. Just for my practice. When running that, do I need to add in the original separated and divorced columns into a sheet and then select them and then run them?
No. So like if I was going to do this again, what I would do is like maybe I would move these somewhere off to the side.
Okay.
Like let's say you're eventually trying to get rid of like, or maybe put them on like a different sheet or something. But like basically I'd want to bring two other columns here. So like I'd get rid of those.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd bring over two other columns that had NaNs in them. So maybe these ones, but I could bring those over to this sheet. Oh yeah, it's because they're, I can't copy and paste them because they're formula. I have to paste values. Because it was that index match to get these.
Oh, right, okay.
And it didn't get the titles. There we go. So paste values. And then if I hit my Control-Shift-N, it reruns that whole thing.
Oh, right, okay, so.
And this one didn't find any NaNs, so that's good. Hopefully it at least worked there.
And you could tell because nothing popped up in
Yeah.
this one?
Basically, in that second one, I highlighted the columns and I hit Control F or Command F to search, and I searched for NaN and didn't find any.
Okay.
Sorry, a lot of this workshop was repeat for you.
Oh, don't worry about it. The refresher is great. I think it's definitely worth showing up every once in a while to refresh a little.
Cool.
And then I did have one last question. I've
Okay.
never known how to do this. So let's say you're selecting your entire sheet
Mhm.
with Command A.
Okay.
It always takes you to the very bottom. How do you scroll back up to the top quickly without unselecting your data?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't figured that out either. Let's see. So mine doesn't take me to the bottom. Mine stops. Mine still shows me here, but where is it? There's a place where you can like type a cell that you want to go to. I thought it was on the home tab like here, but I don't see it. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
I actually don't. I know there's a way to do it. So like, you know how you've shown us, like for Mac, if you want to go down to the very bottom, you just hit Command down and you don't select anything.
mhm.
So if you go to the very bottom and then hit Command A to select everything, it takes you back up to the top. So it's essentially the same thing, just in reverse. But it's just weird that when you hit Command A from like cell 1, it goes all the way down to the very last row and column.
See, mine doesn't do that. Oh, it did here, but earlier it didn't. When if I just click somewhere randomly, it keeps me there.
I'll try that and see if that. Okay, yeah, that works. Huh.
That's something I'm not sure about. I keep forgetting to look, but like whenever I have something highlighted, I'm like, there's got to be a way to go back to the top without scrolling, but I haven't figured
Yeah.
out how to do it because I can't just Control up.
Unfortunately for me, I haven't worked with, a million rows or anything like that, so it's not as big a deal, but it's frustrating enough with 15,000 just having to scroll a little bit. So I figured there was a way to do it, but I think that what you showed me where if you're just somewhere in the data set and hit Command A, it leaves you at that spot. So
Yeah, but it'd be good to know for like if you have clicked in one cell and did like Command Shift down, like I need to be able to get back to the top.
yeah.
Oh, so even the way I tried to do it that I thought might work doesn't work. So you can see here, I've got this all highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
And then right here, I can say I want to go back to P1. But if I hit enter, it just unhighlights.
What if you did like a O1 or something that just took you back up to the top?
I think it's going to just select O1.
Oh, really? Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, I just selected O1.
Okay.
I tried page up. That doesn't work either. I don't know. Maybe there isn't a way, but I haven't figured one out.
Okay. Well, no biggie. Like I said, I can always just go to the bottom of the page and then select up, and then I'm at the top. Or
True. Yep.
hopefully just, when I select randomly inside it, it keeps me at the top. But it's weird that, you select all from like the first cell and it takes you to the very bottom.
I don't know why it would do that.
Yeah. All right. I really appreciate your time and setting this up again.
Yeah, no problem.
Beneficial as always.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no problem. Hope you have a nice time.
Yeah, you too.
Yep. See ya.
Later.